Alright guys, we're going to take a look now at the Izzet deck that I've put together here. I really don't know where to start with this deck. It's kind of quite the hodgepodge. The whole idea behind this originated out of the Electromancer. Now this is a card that we got introduced to slightly before the printing of Return to Ravnica, and it is something that it's a 2/2 for 2, which is, great cost to power ratio. But its ability gives you a chance to reduce the cost of instants and sorceries by 1. And that works really great. I think there is currently a Storm deck trying to make this work. I could be wrong on that. So this is something that it has to be done in Control. Blue and red is a very good color combination for Control. We're familiar with it in Izzet Post. And I mean, how can you go wrong with that? It gives you a lot of opportunities to, play some bigger counter spells that require a bit of a heavier cost because they are cheaper. So what the kind of idea from this deck is let's get Electromancers into play and let's do what we can to protect them. And that is kind of a pretty typical strategy for control decks. It's, the idea that they don't run much in the way of creatures, so what creatures they do get onto the field they want to be able to protect. Now, this is something that I think, again, has a lot of potential, but because of the fact that I am trying to cram in 5 different decks within this time period, I didn't have as much time to really hash these out into something hardcore competitive, so it is in a mildly casual version. I think there is potential here. I think well, I'll give my opinions at the end. But breakdown here was basically, like I said, you get the Electromancer's ability, and you want to do whatever you can to protect it. So you have this whole package here worth of instants. I am running this actually as a teaching shell. I'm running 3 copies of Mystical Teachings because this too has a reduced cost. So being able to tutor things out for 2 and a blue is much more impressive than that 4 cost. Also, the thing you may not be aware of is that the Electromancer's ability affects flashback. So this ability here, where it is 5 and a black, it is going to reduce that down to 4 and a black, and it makes it cheaper to flash that back. So that is the reason I had actually started out with a set of accumulated knowledge in here because of the heavier draw. It gives you overthink twice. But what I realized is that I was being silly because you have this flashback ability, and that means that you can use this card much cheaper. You can play it for 1 blue and then flash it back for its original cost. Another thing that is affected by that is going to be the Overload ability. This is another ability that we were introduced to in Return to Ravnica. It is an ability that is put on spells that are targeted to a single creature, and when you pay the Overload ability, it targets, instead of 1 single creature, it all of a sudden affects every creature, whether it is yours or an opponent's, depending on the spell. So that Overload ability is reduced as well. So what you get is here with the Electrickery and the Mizoom skin is the fact that you can then pay the Overload costs with an Electromancer in play. You can pay the Overload costs, and it's the same as the regular cost of the card. So for 1 red, I can choose to either do 1 damage to a target creature or 1 damage to all creatures my opponents control. So that's really great. Brought in kind of a standard set of control here. I'm running 2 copies of Echoing Truth, and this is something I say it all the time. If I'm running blue or black, I'm running 2 copies of Echoing Truth or Echoing Decay. Hands down, no questions asked. Also running some burn spells. I've had a lot of success with Stagger Shock. One thing I've realized is that it works really well against the Stompy matchup, so it's nice to have that rebound ability. It's all about card advantage, and here you get, card advantage off the Mystical Teachings, you get it off the card draw itself, and then you can get card advantage through stuff like Stagger Shock, which is 2 spells in 1, basically. Brimstone Volley is another great card. It does 3 damage. I can use it as straight up beats for 5 damage if a creature dies. I can use that Morbid ability. Filled out the creature package with a little bit of draw here. 3 Muldrifters and 2 Ninjas. The Ninjas are, not as great in the fact that, in something like Delver Blue, you can return a Spellstutter Sprite and be able to replay that come into play ability. This deck does not have those come into play abilities outside of the Muldrifters, and that's definitely a mid to late game strategy because it's so mana intensive. However, it's still kind of nice if you can manage to sneak in a ninja and get a little extra card draw that way. This deck is definitely looking for draw because you want to find these Electromancers as soon as you can. Also giving a go here is Splatter Thug. I really like this card. It's another great common out of Return to Ravnica. It is a 3 cost creature for a 2/2 first strike. And this is pretty great just by itself, but the fact that it has this new Unleash ability means that it can be a 3/3 first strike for 3 that cannot block. And I'm okay with making that trade-off. The fact that it has the ability to block, and it gives me the option I can choose to either have a bigger creature that cannot block or a smaller creature that can block. I like that kind of utility, and the first strike is something that's definitely hard to deal with. Delver I brought in just because of the fact that it is kind of a heavy control package, and my thinking was it can act as that cheap beat, so we are running kind of a low mana count here, 22 lands. This single swamp is here just for the flashback on Mystical Teachings. I'm running 2 copies of Evolving Wilds. It's one of these things, this deck does not need Evolving Wilds. If you look at something like Izzet Post, and it has the prisms, and it's very easy for it to flashback Mystical Teachings, and it almost needs it. It really helps ramp it up and get it to that late game. This deck does not need Mystical Teachings flashed back. Because of the fact that Electromancer allows you to get things so much cheaper, you can kind of sit back, and if it happens, it happens. Use the Evolving Wilds to fetch red or blue if you absolutely need to, but most of the times you're going to use those Evolving Wilds to find your single black, so that when it does come time to use a Mystical Teachings, you have it available to you. Last thing I guess I did not mention is the Rushing River. Not much to say there. It is kind of a generic return bounce spell. 2 and a blue to return target permanent. You can kick it by sacrificing a land to return a second permanent. So again, just trying to build a bit of a utility package here. I really kind of liked actually the Mizoom skin. Some people may question that card. It actually works out kind of like Vines of Vastwood. It gives me that chance if they're, I want to keep my creatures protected. So if they're trying to get rid of my Electromancer, if there's a Flame Slash or a Lightning Bolt coming my way, I can simply use that to keep my creatures on board. There's also, occasionally that 0/1 boost is going to help. If it pumps my Electromancer to a 2/3, it means that I have that chance to survive a bigger attack. Or I could block a 2/2, I could instantly give it that +0/+1, and then my Electromancer survives and his 2/2 creature dies. So there's some utility there. Like I said, a bit of a rough cut. I really think this deck has some potential, or at least Izzet Control has some potential on its own. Electromancer definitely could help that out. It's just something that you need a lot more time to really dive into. So let's just check out the games and see how this worked out, shall we? Alright guys, we're going to take a look at the first example game using the Izzet deck. Opening hand is not good, obviously. We only have 1 mana available to us, so we want to definitely mulligan down to 6. When we drop to 6, it's not so bad. We are on the draw, so we can make up for that pretty easily. 4 lands available, we hit both colors, and Splatter Thugs will be a nice aggressive start, so we will keep this. Usually we would start out with the Guild Gate here, but because we do top deck into Delver, we want to get that into play so we have the opportunity to get it flipped as soon as possible. Opponent starts out with Gate Creeper, obviously playing a 3-colored version of something. I have played around a little bit with Bant colors. I think there is a lot of potential for some upgrades there once Simic comes out, so we will definitely have to stay tuned on that one. So my turn now. Revealed card with Delver is going to be Brimstone Volley, which is great. We can get that 3 damage going right away. Because we don't have a 2-mana play, we're going to be able to put that Izzet Guild Gate into place and get that untapped as soon as possible. Opponent's turn, he does decide to pacify the Delver, which is okay with me. I do have lots of aggro options available to me with these Splatter Thugs. I am going to take the opportunity to unleash them, make them 3/3 that cannot block. I really think these guys are very, very cool. The fact that they can be 3/3 first strikes for 3 is really fantastic. I'm very willing to take that chance and not allow them the ability to block in order to make that happen. At the same point in time, if you do need to block them, it's really good that you have the option to give them blocking. So swinging through, going to deal some damage there. opponent decides to tap out and is doing Eyes in the Sky, so clearly running some variation of, at the very least, Return to Ravnica. It seemed very centered deck, and is populating these tokens. So we got to keep an eye out. That means for things like those 3/3 Centaur tokens, which will be much more important for us to deal with later on. Luckily for us, we can deal with populate pretty well. We do have options for bouncing permanents, and that's going to completely kill off all tokens. When you bounce them, they get removed, and there's no opportunity for them to come back, so it's going to work pretty well. Takes a draw there off the Injunction, which will pacify basically my Thug for 1 turn, and swings through on his own for a couple through the air. So get another land here. We do have Mana Leak in hand, so we're going to be able to put out this Splatter Thug. I am going to unleash this one as well. We're definitely not in a situation where we need to keep any kind of blockers back. Right now our only threat is going to be the flyers, and we can deal with those later on. We'll find ourselves in a situation definitely where we can kick this Rushing River. We're already sitting at 5 lands, so somewhere about 6 or so I feel pretty okay with using the kicker cost on Rushing River. So going to continue to take some damage through the air. Passes the turn along, I'm going to swing with both Thugs. This deck can actually get pretty aggressive. You know, it's pretty much built on the idea of being control, but because these Thugs can get in relatively early, and that first strike ability just really makes him a strong creature. So my opponent does take the opportunity here to use Tristani's Judgment, which will exile a creature and allow him to populate. At this point in time, it's only going to populate a 1/1 flyer, but that's okay. That's something that I can't deal with right now, so my opponent is happy to have it. Thankfully, you know, I do have plenty of mana available to me here. I can Mana Leak it, and he did have to tap out here in order to make this play. So that's going to go down. Now I have options here for Brimstone Volley to the face if I wanted to, or Rushing River if I wanted to, but because this Gatecreeper Vine did die, he did choose to block one of my Thugs with it. I am going to do the Brimstone to the face. We do get that Morbid ability, and it's going to drop him down to 6. This means he doesn't have an opportunity to attack here, and will have to stay back in order to block these Thugs unless he has another play. He does actually manage to get another Judgment, and he will populate one of his bird tokens. Now he's at a situation, he's got one of those off there, he can just leave one back to block, and the others can do some damage. Draw into a Skin here, going to of course attack, going to be very aggressive with this deck. Gets rid of the token there, and I have finally 5 mana. I can tap out fully and play this Muldrifter, which is going to work out well because we top deck into an Electrickery off that, which will give us a great chance to kill off all of his creatures at once. So another big spell coming down at this point in time. One of the things about Populate, and it kind of draws me off wanting to play it, is the fact that it's so mana intensive. If you look at the Judgment here, it costs 6 to make that happen. The cost for getting 2 bird tokens is going to be 4 off Eyes in the Sky, and the cost here for Horncaller's Chant is 8. And you're basically getting a pretty even cost to creature ratio. However, I don't feel it's a strong enough card to justify that heavy cost. It's going to look a little bit troublesome now on my end because of the fact he does now have 2 of these 4/4 Trampling Rhinos. However, I can get rid of these all pretty easily. The Electrickery will be able to clear off the birds, and then I have Rushing River still available to me, which can clean that off as well. So I actually am going to decide to use the Mystical Teachings here for Echoing Truth. Like I said a little bit ago, I kind of like to stick to about 6 mana. You know, as opposed to some of the other decks where you can get by on a lower mana count, I like to have lots of lands available because we are playing Teachings. You want to have kind of a lot of options as far as being able to play variations of control spells. Echoing Truth here by fetching that out, thinning out my deck a little bit, giving me an opportunity to use this Teachings off flashback, and I can use it to clear off these Rhinos the same way I would a river without having to sacrifice the land. So going to tap out here, get rid of those 2 Rhinos, and I'm going to, of course, again, being aggressive, attack with both of these. He is going to decide to let the Thug through, take the 3 damage in order to kill off the Muldrifter. So tapping out again for another heavy spell obviously would be another Rhino when he's tapped out all of his creatures. Again, we're still pretty well off because we do have Rushing River, which when kicked can get rid of both of those. So gonna tap out, and of course you want to make sure that that sacrificed land is one of the ones that you tapped so you don't lose your mana. Also, you usually want to keep that swamp in play at all times. It is the only swamp we have available to us, the only way for us to flashback teachings, so definitely don't want to lose that. So we're going to be able to swing through here for the win. Again, I feel just kind of showing how underwhelming Populate is. We've actually run into a couple of those in these videos. And it's nice, I understand it, and maybe you could find some way to make it work if you paired it with enough mana draw. But the fact that it's in white, most of the color base for it is going to mean that you don't have a lot as far as control options, and you do have to try and do something like my opponent did here and bring in a third color to make that work. So there we go. Let's check out that second game. Alright guys, we're going to take a look at the second Izzet game here. Opening hand is mediocre at best. We do have 3 lands available to us, and thanks to the Guildgate we do hit both colors. However, we don't have a basic island, which will allow us that turn 1 Delver, so the best point we're going to get is getting that in on turn 2. We're in a situation where, because we're on the play, we're not really going to chance dropping to 6, and we'll just have to take this hand for what it is and try and make the best of it. Going to start out with the Guildgate here. I'm going to have to play a Delver on turn 2. Luckily, our turn 2 play, which would be an Electromancer, is going to be able to come in the next turn. We're going to fetch out the second color we need with the Evolving Wilds. Most of the time when using the Evolving Wilds, if you're not in need of this one swamp, what you're going to want to do is search out a blue mana and island, because of course the deck is a little heavier on the islands than it is on the mountains. So opponent's first play is Doorkeeper. Defender Matters is this whole kind of concept that we were introduced to in Zendikar block, where we had a group of defender creatures that had an ability that got scaled up based upon how many other defender creatures were on the table. So it was something I actually had considered would be a one and done kind of thing, but with Return to Ravnica they did reintroduce it with things like the Doorkeeper here. So we know that we're going to need to be fast. Thankfully for us, we are running these Delvers, so we need to get these flipped because we're going to have a hard time getting through these 4 toughness, and probably the rest of his walls are going to be around 4 toughness as well. So Delver's first chance to flip reveals an Evolving Wilds, which means that we will not get that play. An ideal situation there would have been to top deck into an island, because then we could have put out the Electromancer and had mana available for a mana leak, which we could have used to prevent another defender from coming down, or we could have used it even to play a second Delver of Secrets if we wanted to be more aggressive. Here I am staying back as opposed to playing this Electromancer because I am, like I said, a little bit worried about these Defender Matters. There was another defender creature in Return to Ravnica that allows my opponent the chance to tap it and add X mana of a particular color based upon the number of defender creatures, and that comes in at the 3-drop. So what I wanted to do here is, knowing that that card is a possibility here, I wanted to make sure that I had the mana available that I could counter it. Keeping my opponent back on mana is very important here because it is going to require him to pay 3 to activate this Doorkeeper's ability, so the less mana he has, the less choices he has for activating things like the Doorkeeper. Same with Vent Sentinel. I don't remember, I believe he is running those. And again, it's an activated ability that costs mana, so if I can keep his mana low, then I can be in a better shape here. Unfortunately, well, I guess it's not unfortunate. What happens is he does not actually have that guy and attempts to put out a second Doorkeeper. I decided to counter this. In retrospect, this might have been a little too too much chomping at the bit, I guess you could say. Having 2 Doorkeepers is all well and good. All it's doing basically is upping his count, because in order to activate both of those, he's going to need 6 mana available to him. So I don't necessarily think that needed to be countered right away. It doesn't hurt anything to keep it off the table, however. So our second chance to flip the Delver does reveal a skin, which means we can finally get that flipped over, and we'll be able to swing away with this. Electromancer's going to go into play. He's obviously going to be doing very little damage in this game because of the fact that we're facing down all these walls, but that's okay. He's going to at least give us that ability to reduce the mana costs, and if I play this skin, it's only going to cost me 1 blue to protect both creatures. Again, trying to be aggressive with the Delvers because of the fact that my opponent is going to be running a slew of walls. I need to get these guys flipped and flying over as soon as possible. So I am going to put him out there and not leave myself mana open for the skin. Not too worried about it. Currently I'm seeing blue and green, so the best removal options he's going to have available to him will be bounce spells in blue, and that means I can replay the creature later on. Yep, there is the Sentinel, that's what I thought. And again, if you look at it, the ability there is very strong, but it is going to require 2 mana, so to activate both of these, he needs a total of 5 mana. Mostly what it's going to do is prevent me from prevent me from attacking on the ground with the Electromancers. So, second Delver on his first turn is going to see Brimstone Volley and allow him to flip right away, which is fantastic. Brimstone Volley is not going to be enough to kill off any of these walls just yet until a creature dies, and I can get that Morbid ability to increase the damage up to 5. So opponent's turn now, he puts out another Vent Sentinel. I am going to let both of these drop. Again, I'm starting to realize that, okay, it's fine if he has multiples. Basically all they're going to be doing is upping the count for defender creatures. In the end, he still needs the mana available to play this. I did a long time ago, at this point, put together a deck for an article based on this whole defender wins thing, and I guess I could revisit that now that we've gotten some new ones. And what it came down to is you actually relied heavily on things like those mana walls because they needed to generate the mana that can activate these abilities. If you don't have the mana, these are just walls and not going to slow me down anyways. This probably would be a good option for countering things like the battlement where it's producing mana in a large quantity. Things to target out as opposed to directly targeting these creatures. Once, 1 or 2 is on the table, that's all he needs. I don't actually have a lot in the way of direct removal once it hits the field, so counter spells would be better off used on these mana walls. Swing through, get my opponent down to 5, and it's going to be close to game over unless he has any kind of option to stop my flying. Abundant Growth, digging through his deck, I guess, trying to find out what he can see. Starts generating those manas and dealing that damage with those Sentinels. End of turn here, going to use the Mystical Teachings just to thin out my deck a little bit, find some kind of options. One good thing here could be Echoing Truth, which would allow me the opportunity to get rid of both of these Sentinels. Also could go for any kind of, the river, the shock and stuff. When my opponent is this low, I could go for that to help lower his life. I could even go through, think twice if I absolutely had to. Grab the Mana Leak just so that I have some options here as far as preventing anything he might do to stop this flyover for the win. You're at this point in the game pretty much where the game is almost guaranteed to be yours. You just want to just verify that. Like I said in the deck tech, you really want to get these creatures down. It's control, so you get creatures down and do everything you can to protect them, whether that is the skin to give them hexproof or the Mana Leak. We used the teachings and we made sure we had options to do so. So I really like this deck a lot. I think it definitely has some potential to work its way into a solid Izzet control for daily events. However, it definitely needs a bit of reworking and retuning to kind of solidify some of these choices. But that's another episode, another day, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.